Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store, where you can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke, and keep an eye out for Evolving Skies coming soon. For today's video, we are going to be looking at Umbreon VMAX, undoubtedly one of the strongest cards from Evolving Skies, but today we're not only targeting its ability, we're also looking at it in an attacking sense, as it may be the frontrunner for the single strike archetypes. And the basic concept really is that we are a setup deck as single strike. We know that very well. We need to get many houndooms into play to fulfill some expensive attack costs. But what's good about Umbreon is that we can use supporters to draw and set up every single turn, while still having that option to gust and pick off certain threats from the opponent, put damage on the Pokemon they're attaching to onto the bench, or take out some of their engine pieces like Mareeps and Sobbles and that sort of thing, to really harm your opponent's setup and get going in that prize race, which is always fantastic. And of course, we are representing two different type coverages here. Fighting type coverage to help out against Eternatus, and the dark type coverage, which is going to be very important for the Shadow Rider matchup. And what's also great about Umbreon is that it has a weakness to grass rather than a weakness to fighting on its own. So in that regard, it has a bit of an edge on Eternatus, for example, going into this new format, as we are all expecting Rapid Strike Urshifu to be one of the strongest decks. So the type coveraging and the sort of weakness that it has are some of the biggest selling points of this card just out the gate. So let's jump into the deck list, and it comes as no surprise that we are going thick on the Umbreon VMAX line, where we're going to play a 4-3 count. This is going to be the new sort of like front of house attacking Pokemon, at least in those early stages. And what I love about this attacker compared to single strike Urshifu is that its attack cost is only 3, and that is so much better than 4, obviously. But in this instance, it means that we only need to get one Houndoom up by turn 2 if we've been able to get our manual attachments rolling. So you can get into that max arc much more consistently, and you won't be whiffing those attacks, which is really fantastic for you. And like I said, pairing it with the Dark Signal means we can get damage on the most relevant Pokemon possible. They can just be leaving Pokemon in the active for you in different instances, have just one prizes set up there for you, but you can Dark Signal and target the things that they've been attaching to, that they've not been able to evolve into just yet, and get some good, meaningful damage on there. Now, Max Arc is 160 vanilla, which is no bad thing, but this, of course, does get buffed by single strike energies as well. So oftentimes we can be getting to that 200 mark, 220 if we've been very, very lucky and got a number of single strike rules into play, and maybe even attached for turn with a single strike energy. So you do actually have the capacity to take knockouts on Evolving V Pokemon. You just have to get that little bit good side of fortune, I think, here and there. But it's not a common occurrence. In general, you're looking for 2 shots with this card. And I think very often the map that we're going to be taking with this deck is going to be looking to take out a 2-prize Pokemon, looking to gust up a 1-prize engine style Pokemon to try and cripple and slow down the opponent, and then look towards our Urshifu VMAX to be a Gmax 1-blow 1-shot. That's why you see the backup of Urshifu in here. The type covering gives us great advantage against Eternatus, of course, and even the regular Urshifu V with that impact blow doing 180, again with the single strike energies buffing this up, you can quite easily attack with impact blow turn 2, and again, if you're dark signaling up Pokemon, you can take those 2 prizes off the board straight away before they evolve up into VMAXs. It's one of the big boasts that Umbreon has in a ton of other decks like Victini and Ice Rider and that sort of thing, and we're going to try and do the same thing here with our Urshifu V, for example. So that's really, really good. Even the Umbreon V can do 160 vanilla damage if it has damage counters on it, and oftentimes to fulfill the attack cost, you'll single strike raw onto your own Umbreon, so that will fulfill the extra damage that you'll be dealing. So you can quite easily be taking 1 and 2 prize knockouts with the help of Dark Signal gusting here by that turn 2. So that's really great for you in general. And the Gmax 1-blow is going to be helpful in a ton of matchups because it just hits such a high threshold of damage that oftentimes we're looking to use this once per game exactly, and it's either going to be to take our last 3 prizes or to take 3 prizes knowing that we're taking all the energy off this Urshifu. It's going to just be dead weight from then on. It's likely to get knocked out, and we're going to have energies planted around elsewhere to see ourselves through the game. Or if we can like reload onto this Urshifu, if it's ignored, for example, you can gust and beat down things like Crobats thanks to weakness and that sort of thing. So looking to only really get one Gmax one blow in throughout the entire game, but the damage is so high that it's going to work out for us here. You could get away with playing one copy realistically because you only want to use it once, but we're playing that second copy just because of research and that sort of thing. You want to be able to access it when it's required. Houndoom is obviously the engine of all of these single strike decks, where you can pluck the single strike energies out of the deck and attach them. It's obviously a huge part of our engine here. And we also played 2 copies of Crobat V with that dark asset, allowing us to draw some additional cards. You do want to spend a lot of your board spaces on houndours, so use these Crobats sparingly. But in general, just drawing more cards toward combo pieces and just making sure that we're getting into the game is obviously an important note here. Other things to bear in mind, Laser Focus is open in this list because we are playing 3 copies of basic fighting. It's not a lot, but hopefully it means that we could get that Laser Focus if need be. And Mean Look can be just a little bit of an annoyance in the opening stages to stop retreating on certain Pokemon. But in general, we're looking to get towards the higher energy attack costs for the most part here. Onto the trainers then. We are quite a heavily set up reliant deck, and having a couple extra Great Balls in here alongside the high Incense and Quick Ball count should hopefully mean that we're getting into multiple Houndours in those opening stages. We have even more search in the form of supporters as well, so you'll see how easily it should be in theory to get a lot of these Pokemon into play, because we are heavily focused on Piers as an engine in this list, because Piers not only gets us dark Pokemon, but it also gets us capture energy, which gets us more basics into play in general. So the high ball search count plus the 4 captures plus Piers that can help us search out those captures for even more ball search means that we are able to flood the board much easier than current single strike lists have been able to, which is fantastic. We play a couple copies of Urn of Vitality. I think most of the time we're going early game Umbreon, late game Urshifu VMAX. That's how things pan out in a lot of situations. It can go vice versa in certain instances, but in general, you really need to hit 1 Urn for 1 reload because of how your energy is being split a lot of the time. As well as your turn attachments. Obviously, we play that second copy so that we have access to it at the right time, and in case of prizing, that sort of thing. 3 Air Balloon, it's not a huge amount of switch cards, and to be honest, it could be an exploitable weakness of this deck, and I could foresee myself playing more options here. Just something to bear in mind, it is a nice pivot, but in general, we can attach to all of our Pokemon via Single Strike Raw, and if we have to attack with Houndoom, we can. It can do like a reasonable 90 or so damage, which then can lead into a reasonable like 220 or so damage from an Umbreon. So it actually could force a 2-hit KO into VMAXs. So it's not the end of the world if you have to use your Houndooms. And then we have 3 Tower of Darkness. It's obviously a great stadium bounce to Path of the Peak because we want to be using our Umbreons for gusting, but also it draws us more cards. It can get rid of excess Umbreon pieces, Urshifu pieces, Houndoom pieces even. And it can get rid of excess towers if need be. So a few extra draws in those opening stages is never a bad thing to help us get even more set up. Onto the supporters, we are still playing 2 copies of Boss. It protects us around Path to the Peak decks. And it just means that if your opponent is bossing up your Umbreons before they evolve, because our board space is so limited, because it's so focused on having lots of Houndours out, if you've been forced into playing Crobats, if you're trying to use Urshifu in the late game, and your opponent chooses to boss and KO your Umbreon V before it VMAXes, then they completely limit you from all gust whatsoever. So you want to have bosses in here as well, just as that fallback option to have even more protection and being allowed to just gust for game essentially, which is really nice. Let's not forget that things like beatdown on Urshifu VMAX is a great play that you can almost checkmate people with by having this huge VMAX in the active. It's already got 3 energies attached to it. It's just 1 away from a huge Gmax 1 blow to wipe off another 3 prize Pokemon, and your opponent basically can't tank with anything at that point. So yeah, Boss is just a fantastic card alongside the heavy gusting that we have from the Umbreon. And then we have the Marnies, but Piers is actually a big star of the show in this deck, like I keep saying. We're most happy with like 3 Houndooms in play, and then we have the Umbreons that we always want to have access to. Piers acts as a boss's orders in a lot of situations because he gets you your Umbreon VMAX and he gets you capture. If you want it to be getting more Houndours into play, your backup Umbreon V into play, that's all gravy for you. Piers can do all of that good stuff. Alternatively, if you go aggressive with the Piers, you can grab the single strike energy here as well. to increase your damage output even further, so it can make those very aggressive early game lines possible, because you can get double Houndoom into play and Piers out the single strike energy here to get all the way up to 220 damage. So that's a really fantastic push on the max arc there from the Umbreon. And then Research is going to stitch things all together because it's just such a good card. You have to play them. Onto the energy then. We are playing 4 copies of the single strike energy and 4 copies of the capture. I love capture energy post rotation. I think this card is going to be in a ton of decks. It's absolutely cracked. So yeah, going to max out copies here. Even better when Piers is going to be cherry picking these from the deck, so you get multiple activations every game. Because we have 2 colorless in the attack cost of Umbreon, you can use it very often, which is great. And 3 copies of fighting energy, helping us to laser focus, even if need be, into some lower damage output style decks. For example, against Rapid Strike, you can quite easily go ahead and use this on your Urshifu V without any ramification, really. And it means that you can hold off on benching multiple Pokemon in certain instances as well. So it allows you to play quite a different game plan against Rapid Strike, which I think is pretty important, actually. And in general, it's just an extra few cards in here to give us extra attachments throughout the game and make sure that we don't run out. We much prefer them being fighting energies to darkness energies, because we only need 1 darkness to fulfill the attack cost of Max Arc from Umbreon, whereas we need multiple fightings to fulfill Urshifu's attacks. Here's the full list then. Pause now if need be, but it will also be in the description down below. For tech options, there are a few other things here. Like I said, with just the 3 air balloon, that does leave us a little bit vulnerable. So having some additional switch outs here would be pretty reasonable. Even just playing 1 copy of Hiding Darkness Energy, because you have Piers, it gives you multiple outs to move out of your Houndours, Houndooms, and Umbreons even. So that could be pretty important. Or just adding physical switch cards in here as well. Sun and Moon Badge is a new tool that allows you to stop your opponent bossing up your Umbreons. And if we're moving into a 2-shot VMAX format, one thing that you can do really is get your attack in, tank a hit from Umbreon, and simply retreat out of there and slap a Sun and Moon badge on, and then your opponent can't access it. You've essentially bought a free turn off the opponent if they don't play any sniping. The problem is, firstly, we're expecting there to be sniping decks, and secondly, there could be Umbreon decks, and that could still get around the Sun and Moon badge. So I still think a handful of decks will be able to get around this tool in general, and we don't even know yet about tool removal or that sort of stuff. So I think right now we don't really know how the format's lining up, but it could be a card to bear in mind for the future if we feel like we can take advantage of it against some of the top decks. And another card I've actually considered is Zigzagoon. The main reason it's not in here is just board space is so premium. But it's another great way that you can reach something like 210 hit points very aggressively. And I think there are some decks that just fold if you can knock out their V before they're able to evolve it into a VMAX. And when you have Piers on your side, you can cherry pick the Zigzagoon quite reasonably. So I think it's actually a decent modifier that I would certainly consider. Onto the matchup overview then. The only things that really scare me is Zacian if they're playing Toughness Capes, because our damage output is just quite poor into them quite often. Leafeon is quite bad. They have weakness on Umbreon, let's not forget, and they are crippling our switch outs, which we're trying to be quite greedy with right now, admittedly. And I also think Ice Rider is probably a bit of an issue, especially if they are playing Quick Shooting Inteleon, because we naturally damage ourselves so much via Houndoom that the Max Lance actually does reach into the one-shot range if they are using quick shootings as well. So I think those are the biggest issues. Glaceon is less of a problem now that we have double G-Max One Blow on our side. We can just burst through the Crystal Veil, no problem. So yeah, I think those are the main issues overall. On to my closing thoughts. Umbreon's damage is slightly below where I'd like it more often than not, and I think you really do need to pop off with single strike energies and a couple Houndooms to really get the full value out of this for maximum tempo. So oftentimes you are looking for that 2-shot realm and really hoping that Urshifu VMAX can be that late game sweep for you to really catch up on not exactly tempo, but a huge way to just clear off your advantage and really make the most of your advantage, really, rather than just slowing down in that late game where you're just consistently 2-shotting, just like a Victini VMAX deck kind of would be doing. I also think the setup nature of this deck is a little bit awkward. Obviously, we're very reliant on those special energies as well, so urns are required and all these other pieces go alongside the nature of the deck. So that just means that we don't have many cuts available to make any cool plays, really. You just have to go all in on the ball search and hope that the setup gets you going most of the time. But ultimately, I'm very optimistic about Umbreon. I think it's got great type coverage. I think it could surpass Eternatus even, because it has a better weakness in grass than it does to fighting. and it offers that type coverage against Shadow Rider, which is probably the best check to Urshifu, and is an inherently powerful archetype in its own right, alongside that Alcremie for big one-hit KO potential. So yeah, I'm optimistic for Umbreon. I think it certainly has a place in the format, not just as sitting back on the bench and gaining you value via gusting, but also getting in there and getting involved in the fight as well. Let me know your thoughts about Single Strike Umbreon. I'd love to hear them down below. We're going to continue with a ton more decks in this format, so stay tuned. I'll see you in another video soon. Cheers.